And so we're in the middle of a chapter called Building a Home. And we feel that this is a season where we're preparing for what's coming. And if you're new to the ramp, we've been looking for a place to have Sunday morning services for about a year. And so here we are. Here we are in the morning. About a year ago, we had two congregations, one that met in Media City in the morning, and then one that met on Oxford Road, right in the middle of the university campuses, in the evening. And for the past year, we've kind of been on a journey of looking for the next place because those venues are being sold or other things are happening with those. And so now we're in a season where we've landed here. And although this isn't our final place, this is the next place. And in any transition in your life, you have these opportunities to find new places that may be next places, but not the final place. And I've discovered that we can narrow all of human population down to two categories of people: destination people and journey people. Can I get a witness? I've got a couple destination people in my house. And anytime you start to talk about process or journey, they start to get antsy because they're really into destination. They're really into the final step. So you start to talk about process and you can just see the eyes glaze over. It feels like red tape. It feels unnecessary. It feels like, why are we talking about this again? Can't we just get the job done? Any destination people in the house? Come on, if they didn't raise their hand, but you know that's a destination person, just point them out. Just call them out. Then there's journey people. And they're maybe the hippies at heart among us. They're like, man, it doesn't matter where you're going. It just matters how you get there. Just enjoy the journey, Life's all about experience. It's all about the journey. Just enjoy every day as it comes. No one knows where they're going, where they're ending up. And thank you to you process people, to you journey people, because you help us enjoy every day, even though we don't know where today may be headed. And when we're in seasons like this, it puts a demand on both journey people and destination people. And so everybody's needed. Say, I'm needed. Everybody's needed in a story of transition in Ramp Church. So although this teaching chapter has been about building a home, it sounds like a destination. What we've really been talking about is we've been talking about transition. We've been talking about what does it mean to be between places? What does it mean to be out of the place where you were, but not yet in the place where you're going? Anybody been there before? It feels like the old place is dead to you, but the new place isn't alive to you yet. And we've discussed, what does God do in these seasons of in-between? What happens in moments of transition? Because there's a unique openness and vulnerability to God working in our lives in seasons of transition that other seasons don't naturally allow us or force that place in our lives out into the open. And so God, I believe, sometimes brings us into seasons of transition, not to torture us, but to actually prepare us to be more of the people he wants us to be to receive the new thing. And so the truth is, God is both a process and a destination God. And he's into the journey and he's into the final place. So this is our fourth week. And the first week we talked about the call to have more faith. And it's not simply the quantity of our faith, but it's also the quality that your and my faith has certain ingredients that need to go into it. To really be able to be a type of people that can step into what God has for us. And then the next week, Stacy spoke about willingness and this call to not be a willful people that just holds on and tries to use faith to control or manipulate our world, but we just let go and we're willing to go wherever the Lord wants us to go. And then last week, Micah spoke about grace and the tie between grace and work. Wasn't that an amazing message? Didn't that help anybody? And that those two words, grace and work, are maybe counterintuitive, but they're meant to coexist in our life with the Lord. And this week, I'm going to talk about preparation for the new thing. But before I do, I want to remind you about our building offering that's coming up on the 6th of October. So Building Offering Sunday, that is also our 7-year anniversary. So yeah, so almost happy birthday, Ramp Church. We're still a little kid church in many ways, but God's doing so much among us. And to remind you about that first goal, here's our first goal. We're looking to raise 500,000 pounds, and that's going to come through donations. So the Lord's going to lead many of you to give on that opening Sunday, but there's also going to be a looking ahead. What does the next year of our lives include, and how do I plan that out? How do I pledge about what's to come to be a part of what we feel like the Lord is doing? And there's going to be grants that we're pursuing as well. So between now and the end of the year, there's a few things that we're doing. So coming soon, there's going to be prayer walking. I don't know why. That's a really Christian phrase, isn't it? Like, I don't know if we think prayer is more powerful when I'm moving. But I think there is something about getting on the ground. So we're going to get on the ground in maybe some spaces we feel like the Lord is leading us to and walk in those spaces. Townhouse meetings, we want to also be very transparent about where our finances have been. And I think anybody who's partnering with something financially, there's a sense of we want to trust, like, where's all this finance going? So we want to just let you know, here's where your giving is going. Here's what's coming in at Ramp Church, and here's where it goes. So you have a sense of, where is this thing headed financially? Where have we been? And we're not just giving to some black hole hoping that someone's using this in a wise way, but that we see this as we're all partnering together for the sake of God's kingdom. So there's going to be some meetings that come up where we're just going to get transparent about that. There's also surveys. So we want to hear from every person in Ramp Church about what you would love to see in the future in our building. What is rewarding for you? What do you feel like is life-giving for you? When it comes to interacting with facilities and buildings. And if you're new to Ramp Church, maybe you're already checked out and you're bored and you're like, this has nothing to do with me. I just want to invite you into this teaching chapter in this way. At the end of this chapter, I believe every single person in this room has an opportunity to know how to believe God for the things that God is leading you to believe for. So the total chapter is going to be about 7 weeks. And if you can just imagine this, at the end of 7 weeks, you're going to have greater revelation and insight when you feel like God's revealed something to you either personally or through this word. You're going to have greater revelation on what does it mean to contend for what God's promised over my life. And isn't it amazing to think that in 7 weeks, I can come so far in my life of faith that will impact the future decades of your life. And so we listen with 2 ears through this entire teaching chapter. One is on the personal level, how do I grow in faith? And the other ear is what's God saying to us on a corporate level, and where's he taking us? So go ahead and open up your Bible to Joshua chapter 1. What is a series about giving and taking new things without Joshua chapter 1? It's kind of like obligatory in the teaching world. So the title of this message is, Are You Ready for Where You're Going? Are you ready for where you're going? The next 3 weeks in Manchester, our Freshers Weeks are happening all around. So maybe there's some new students in the room. Manchester has the highest concentration of university students in Europe. So within an hour's drive of where you're sitting right now, there's 330,000 university students. And so we have a heart that's turned towards the next generation. So maybe you're new to uni. Maybe you're new to the city. Maybe you're starting a new job. Maybe there's some new relationships in your life. Maybe you're in a new season of life where you're learning to relate to aging parents. Maybe you're an empty nester, aging children. Maybe you've just lost a job. Maybe there's been a family member who's had a life-changing diagnosis. Whatever type of change is happening in your life, you and I can be better prepared for what's coming. And that's what this teaching today is about. Joshua chapter number 1, we're going to read verses 1 through 3 and then 5 through 9. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now you and all the people prepare to cross over the Jordan to the land I'm giving the Israelites. I've given you every place where the sole of your foot treads, just as I promised Moses. Skip to verse 5. Now no one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. I will be with you just as I was with Moses. I will not leave you or abandon you. Isn't that a beautiful promise? Jesus nods to this in the Great Commission in Matthew 28 when he commissions them and says, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. Verse number 6, be strong and courageous, for you will distribute the land I swore to their ancestors to give them as an inheritance. Above all, be strong and very courageous, to observe carefully the whole instruction my servant Moses commanded you. Don't turn from it to the right or the left, so that you'll have success wherever you go. This book of instruction must not depart from your mouth. You're to meditate on it day and night so that you may carefully observe everything written in it. For then you will prosper and succeed in whatever you do. Haven't I commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. What an incredible promise. And maybe if we're casually reading this, we may just hear that in like a devotional or maybe a therapeutic sense of like, the Lord's going to be with me. And of course, that's a beautiful promise. But we can miss the revelatory and the covenantal sense that that God is declaring this over each one of us, and Jesus declares it over you. And that is, this is God reminding Israel, I've made a covenant with you. Remember, we've spoken about Exodus 33, and there is a type of marriage that God entered into with his people, and he's alluding to that covenant now, and that's not simply, I'm gonna pat you on the back when you need some encouragement. He is committing his divine nearness to them. And this is essentially what he's saying. Whatever is ahead, I'm with you. Whatever the future holds, I'm by your side. And there's a sense of readiness for what's coming that starts with the recognition that God is with me. And when we talk about salvation, maybe you're new to faith, maybe you're here exploring faith. When we talk about salvation in a Christian sense, this is primarily what we're talking about. Our faith in God is not primarily about getting us some sort of blessings. It's not the things that God gives us that initiates our faith. It is God himself that initiates our faith. And this is so important for us in this season where we're believing for a building ramp church. Can I just say, a building is not the promise. A building isn't the promise. God is the promise. God doesn't give us faith so we can get stuff. God gives us faith so that we can get him. And this is a jarring reality sometimes because we live in a world that everything we do is focused around meeting our needs or success or getting something we don't currently have. And then often when we come into a community of faith, we think, faith is now another tool for that same end. And I want to tell you, it isn't. Faith is a tool. It's an instrument that positions us to receive God himself. And it is then our proximity to God that positions us to receive all the things that he's promised. But it is ultimately God that's the fulfillment of his promise to us. This is what was lost in Genesis, and this is what the rest of the biblical story and the rest of the human story is leading us to explore. It is, how do we find God again? This week we're talking about readiness for what's coming. Have you ever heard the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts motto? Be prepared. You heard that? Be prepared. I wasn't a Boy Scout, but I've heard that motto, be prepared. And if you've heard everybody say that, the fitting response is, well, be prepared for what? Be ready for what? And I think there's an implication in the motto that is this: be prepared for anything. Be prepared or ready for anything. And in many ways, this is what Joshua chapter 1 is saying. But we see this all throughout Scripture. We see God calling people to be prepared for anything. Abraham, leave the place you're at and go to the place I will show you. There's this in between. So leave and I'll show you where you're going. Be prepared for anything. Okay, got you, Lord. What place again? No, I'll show you. Just be ready for it. Okay. Thanks for the clarity, Lord. Joseph, I love this because here's an idea where Joseph grew up having very clear ideas on where he was headed in life. God gave him dreams. These dreams, these destinations for him were, you're going to lead your entire family, even your parents. Actually, they're going to physically bow down to you. So Joseph had the destination, but he had no idea what the process to get there was. So readiness for Joseph meant anything, like be ready for anything. Joseph, murder attempts, attempted sexual assault, slavery, prison. Just get ready, Joseph, for anything. But the ultimate, of course, is Jesus himself. You know, many theologians believe that Jesus was not aware. He wasn't just innately aware of his own identity. Now, we don't know this for sure, but it's a fun idea to explore that he had to discover who he was through faith. And it was through his revelation and his own relationship with the Lord that he had the revelation of who he was. He wasn't constantly aware of that journey. Just imagine the conversation with the Godhead before he decided to come. And everybody's talking about the plan. And they're like, Jesus, you know what's ahead. And he's like, yeah, I know what's ahead. And they're like, okay, you've got to go rescue humanity out of their mess. And he's like, all right, I packed my bag. I'm ready. Let's do this. And they're like, whoa. Before you go, let me fill you in on what's going to await you. There's going to be some suffering. Okay, I can see that that's ahead. But there's going to be a neediness that you've never known. There's going to be a depth of your own need for God and direction that you've never experienced before. I know, Jesus, that all of the cosmos is sustained by your power and wisdom, but you're going to need other people to feed you. Oh, wait a second. You're going to need to eat. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. You're going to need to eat, Jesus. Have you ever eaten? Okay, that's going to be a new thing as part of your life. You're going to need to eat, and you're going to depend as a baby on other people feeding you. And then you won't know who you are and who I am. You're going to have to discover that. Because the only way for you to impart the faith that's going to carry the rest of humanity into their God-given destiny, you've got to pioneer the way by discovering your own faith. This is why the writer of Hebrews would say Jesus was touched in all places with the feeling of our infirmity. So Jesus didn't end up at the destination and then to show us the way. He had our same starting point. And it was through his journey of discovery that God then pioneered the way for you and I. So Jesus was ready for anything. I want to talk about 3 essential postures to be ready for anything. I want to pull this out of Joshua chapter number 1. I'm struck by the primary descriptor of the 2 main characters we just read about in Joshua chapter 1. Out of all the things that the biblical witness could have mentioned about Moses or about Joshua, this is what they said. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. Moses, my servant, is dead. And then he continues the story. And the first posture to be ready for anything is this. It is seeking to serve. Seeking to serve. I want to say this. We generally underestimate the power of serving others and the way it shapes and even mends our internal world. I'm not going to expand on this too much because Stacy spoke really well about this in her message on willingness. But I will say this, Joshua's servant heart, his volunteer spirit, wasn't just about his current season. It prepared him for what was coming. Because you will never be promoted out of a volunteer spirit. It's not like God has a future destination for you that doesn't include a willingness of heart, the posture of serving those around you. In many ways, the promotion is learning how to serve new people in new situations, in new life experiences that you've never served before. It's just a journey into more serving. So although Joshua was serving Moses, Moses had an even tougher boss. Moses was serving God. And Moses' service to God was so demanding that at the end, God didn't even let Moses obtain the promise. His performance review didn't go too well. So we have this idea sometimes that someday I'm gonna make it and I won't have to serve. Everybody's gonna serve me. And then we convince ourselves that that's God's dream for my life, of some place where I'm served and I'm not serving others. But I actually wanna say that the life of service is the life that is most fulfilling and satisfying for you and I. And this is not simply just because of the biblical witness. Evan Carmichael, in his book, Built to Serve, a secular author, he shows that studies show that people who serve are better positioned to carry an optimism about their life with reduced stress and increased resilience. Carmichael highlights how people can tend to be more selfish in difficult times as they focus on survival. But the key may actually be to serve. They did functional MRIs on people's brains in places of service. And they found that serving others hits the same part of your brain as food and sex. Carmichael's conclusion is this: you are literally hardwired to help and serve others. It's hardwired, it's built into you. God built into you the need to serve others. It's not something we're meant to grow out of. And beyond that, the spiritual revelation behind this is that it prepares you for what's coming. Of course, Jesus is the ultimate example of this, but I'm reminded of John the Baptist as well. You remember John's story. So when Jesus comes around, John has, his ministry is blowing and going. I mean, he's got people following, people coming out in the wilderness, religious leaders, the elite are coming out, the Jewish aristocracy is coming out to see him. And then Jesus comes around and his disciples, obviously disturbed, they come up to Jesus and they're like, hey, they come to John, they're like, bro, all of our followers are following Jesus. And John has a crazy response. He's not like, okay, Instagram marketing, just up it. You know what I mean? Sponsored posts, bro. Get them out. Are you up on the e-newsletters? How about those welcome cards when people come? Are you really handling that? He doesn't do that. His response is, this was the plan all along. The only thing that positions you for that kind of envy-less decision in transition in the new thing is if the whole reason you were doing it is to serve others anyway. You're living open-handed, and whatever comes and whatever goes, it's the Lord who gives and the Lord who takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Because my heart posture in it all was simply to serve the master who redeemed and rescued me. And here's the principle behind it. Your posture to serve is an antidote to ego. Here's something I just want to let you know for those of you who've been in church for a long time. Oftentimes, we find these settings very monotonous. There's times we come to church and we're like, why are we doing this again? Why are we here again? Same songs, same dude with a terrible American accent, preaching the same stories I've heard him say 10 times. Why are we doing this? And sometimes we haven't realized that we've actually formed a deeper relationship with the mechanisms of church than the God who is holding the church in his hand. And part of what breaks us out of that is this posture to serve, that I realize my whole life is given, fully given to the God behind the mechanisms. And it moves me out of an ego-centered existence. Serving prepares you for the next thing. And this is the principle. Giving yourself to serve now is preparation for where you're going next. Giving yourself to serve now is preparation for where you're going next. How do you find where to serve? Well, looking for needs, that's a good place to start. Also getting in tune with your value system, even more sometimes than your skills. Where can I bring value? But something we can learn from Joshua 1 is start with where you've hurt in the past. I think one of the things that qualified Joshua to lead Israel is he'd been a part of another group 40 years prior that were kept out of the promise. For 40 years, he'd carried the pain of that, and he'd taken it to the Lord. And he'd found a place of serving God despite the pain. And in that place, God said, now you're ready. Now you're ready to lead because you've invited me into the place that hurt. Now you can lead others into the same destination. Number one, seek to serve. Seek to serve. Number two, steward others' success. In verses 1 through 3, here's what verse 3, Joshua 1, it says this: I've given you every place where the sole of your foot treads. And this phrase sticks out to me. Just as I promised Moses. And then again in verse 6, be strong and courageous, for you will distribute the land I swore to their ancestors to give them as an inheritance. It's so wild to me that Joshua was about to give his life in leading people into something that God promised somebody else. And I want to tell you, your role in the human story is going to make sense when you realize that you're a steward of what was given to you for the sake of who's coming after you. Did you hear me? Something shifts in your life when you realize that your role in the human story is to steward what's been given to you for the sake of who's coming after you. We are stewards of generational promises. And can I just speak into our cultural moment just for a minute? In the West, we really are the whole way we understand what's good and right in our society is what brings me freedom. And even our very democracy is built on this idea of, we live in a liberal democracy, right? Where the whole idea of government is to protect everybody's individual liberties. The highest good is to be liberated from anything that would constrain me, which means the highest cultural sin is anything that makes me say no. So liberation is the goal of the world around us. It's to be set free from anything that constrains. And we've taken that idea to such a radical limit that we even disconnect ourselves from generations. That there is no sense of responsibility to what's been given to me because responsibility is pressure, right? Pressure is constraint. And then when I'm given something, it's only for my use, right? And the reason I want to bring that to the forefront is when you start to step into this idea of I'm stewarding something that's been given to me for the sake of someone who's coming after me, you're going to fight against this pressure in your mind. It's a current to control my own life, to only do what makes sense to me, to cast off any restraints. But the invitation in the kingdom is to steward what's been given to us for the sake of who's coming after us. When I was in high school, my parents owned small businesses. And anybody grow up in like a small business family. Yeah, I see some hands around the room. So when I was in high school and I started to work in our small businesses, I realized that the hardest working person in our small business was the owners. When someone called and they canceled their shift, who fills the space, right? Holidays, you can't get the shifts filled. The owners fill the shifts. And so it even put this rhythm in me. I think one of the reasons why when I started to lead a church, actually doing something all day Sunday was kind of a normal kind of a rhythm for me, because that's what you do when you own a business, right? In the small business world, it's like weekends, what are those? It's like I got to be there to open up. And I've realized that kind of a posture partnered with the heart of a steward is exactly the biblical posture that we're called to hold. And it is this. We're called to have owners' hands, but stewards' hearts. We have this idea that I'm stewarding what is someone else's for the sake of someone yet to come, but I'm treating it as if I owned it. I'm the first to lock up, I'm the first to open up, and I'm the last to lock up, right? So I have owner's hands, whatever it takes, but my heart isn't connected in the sense that I feel like my identity or my worth is tied into what I'm working in. Why are we doing a building campaign? Because we're seeking to set up the next generation for success. We're seeking to steward what we've been given for the sake of who's coming. So the first posture to be ready for anything is to seek to serve. It's going to set you up for any season, whatever is coming. If you're serving, you're ready for what's coming. Number two, you have the mentality that I'm stewarding other people's success. I'm not tied to this, but I am tied to this. And then the third thing is you're sowing in secret. You're sowing in secret. We know Joshua's life was marked by his private courage before his public leadership. I'm thinking about Exodus 33, which tells this beautiful story about Moses coming into the tent of the Lord to commune with God. And you know the story. Moses would speak to God face to face as a man speaks to his friend. Moses would leave and Joshua would stay. And not because it's in his job description, not because Moses would pay him more, but he would stay because he desired communion with God. Now, Moses maybe had some things he needed to do. He was leading a couple million people. But Joshua stayed in the tent of the Lord. Why? Because he was sowing in secret. He was sowing in secret. And this reality is important for us. It's important for you as you prepare for whatever's coming next. Your future public realities are being formed by your current private realities. Your future public realities are being formed by your current private realities. Not only do we shortchange ourselves when we minimize our private lives or our private brokenness, our private sin to something that invites God's discipline, but you're missing the more profound lesson. And that is God is leading you and I into integrity in every area of our life because we will naturally manifest what is most true about us. Did you hear me? You and I will naturally, we will bring it out into the world what is most true about us privately. And that's why what prepares you for what's coming is to contend in your life with God for private realities to become true. And I know we live in a filtered world, that the public sees the version of me I want them to see. But what is most important about your future is what God is doing in you right now. Amen? So when I consider sowing in secret, I can't help but think about giving. So can I talk about giving for just a few minutes? If you're new to Ramp Church, sorry, we're just now meeting and I'm already talking about money. That's kind of rude. But we don't talk about this often here at Ramp Church. And I think as we're preparing for a giving campaign, it's right and fitting. So if you're new to faith, these are not rules that you have to follow. You can receive this as you could have a different relationship with money in your life. There's a different vision that God has with you, for you in your finances. So yeah, the subject of money, it can be strange in church. And we're rightly skeptical at times about the combination of faith and finances. But Scripture seems to be quite comfortable with it. In fact, Jesus spoke more about money than any other topic. And in the Bible as a whole, the Bible offers 500 verses on prayer, less than 500 verses on faith, but more than 2,000 verses on money and possessions. Isn't that wild? Isn't that interesting? So when we're talking about the emphasis of our message, this is maybe the third time I've spoken about this from the platform in 7 years. And I don't even know if I'm emphasizing it the way the Bible is emphasizing it, but I'm doing my best, guys, right? Why? Why does God and the Bible talk about money so much? There's a few reasons. I want to highlight a couple of them. The first one is this: because your spending shapes you. You're changed by what you buy. This is, of course, in the sense that you have to maintain and serve any, material possessions that you have. But it's deeper than that. The deeper thing is this: what you trade your time and energy and talents and wisdom for money, when you trade it, as you do with work, then when you spend your money, you're literally trading your life for your things. Jesus said it like this: wherever your treasure is, there your heart is also. Richard Swinson says it like this: everything I own owns me. You are shaped by what you spend. I can prove it to you. If you and I decided that we were going to go into an investment in a company together, you could not care a thing about companies or stocks. But as soon as you and I put our money in a company, you're going to be checking yahoo.com stock every single day of your life. Actually, you're going to have to put up some sort of blocker that you don't check it 4 times a day. Why? Because what you invest in, it shapes you, it pulls you. Because now my life is tied to the future of this thing. This is one of the reasons that the Bible talks about money. The second reason is this: your God always has your money. People, sometimes when we get to church and we're like, why do we talk about money in church? Why does God care about my money? I think the answer is this: your God always has your money. What do I mean by God? Whatever determines your worth, your value, your identity, your course in life, your resources always follow that. And the shift comes in covenant with the true God, is now He is the center of our lives. I heard about someone recently who was having trouble with the idea of giving. And I get it, all of us are on a journey. But they had a profound response to this idea of committed giving. And when we talk about committed giving, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the response was, well, that would mean my whole life would have to center around God. Now we're getting somewhere. Exactly. And this is the message, the deeper message in that. Your life is already centered around something. It's centered around your desires. It's centered around your image. It's centered around your future. It's centered around your children. It's centered around something. And the invitation of Christian faith is not to bring your centerless life into centered around God. It's to replace whatever your life is centered around now with something that is eternal and lasting and sustaining. Something that can, when everything else shifts, it remains true. And the biblical vision for our money and finances is simply to bring all of our life around this central idea that God is our provider. Everything we have has come from Him anyway. So your spending shapes you. Your God always has your money. Your faith is best expressed not when you can recite some doctrinal creed or confession, but it's best expressed in where you place your trust. Where's the trust in your heart. So what does it look like to adopt a biblical vision for my financial life? To sow in secret. And I just want to talk about 3 things quickly. And the first one is a biblical idea called tithe. Say tithe. Now, let me just be clear. As a Bible teacher, this is not a requirement for New Testament believers. This is not like a law for our lives, okay? That ceremonial and civic law it's been fulfilled in Jesus. But it is a demonstration of a biblical principle. Stacy and I tithe, and we actually seek our desires from year to year to even increase that. Tithe is a word, it's a biblical word, it literally means 10%. And so we see throughout the biblical witness, God actually instructed Israel to give that portion of their finances to see the work of God continue in their cities. And so I love it for several reasons. And Stacy and I practice it for several reasons. Number one, it declares our dependence upon God. That before a bill is paid, before we buy any clothes, before anything happens in our life, we are committed to giving a portion to God. And it's our way to declare, my life is centered around you. Now, maybe you're like, okay, I'm already weirded out. Like, this is getting a little too cultish for me. The invitation says in 1 John 5 says this, that the commands of God are not burdensome. They're not meant to be burdensome. But this is meant to be the life of God's Spirit in us, which conquers the world. That's what 1 John 5. It conquers the world's vision of doing life. And so it's a way to disconnect us from the storyline that you are what you make. You are what you wear. You are what you drive. You are how many zeros are in your bank account. And when a portion of my finances leaves to God every single month, it is my way to declare, God, you are first in my life. Not just in the songs that I sing, but in my very material goods, I'm starting with you. And I mean, my desire would be at the end of my life that I'm living on 10 and giving away 90. I mean, wouldn't that be an amazing vision? Now, I'm on the salary of a pastor, so the chances of that are pretty slim. But that would be beautiful. So where do you give your tithe? Again, there's no, it's not like dictated in Scripture. It's not dictated in the New Testament. It is a biblical principle. But I think here are the main ideas that surround it. It's about consistency. It's about dependence. And it's about letting go of control. One of the things I love about the tithe is I don't determine where it goes. I think that's part of the biblical principle is I don't just choose, because that's me maintaining control. I think part of the principle of the tithe is I just let it out of my hands. And I'm giving it to God as a sign that I trust him. If you've never given before, then maybe you don't want to start with tithe. I would challenge you to, but maybe you don't want to. Just give something, okay? The offering bucket comes around, just give some pocket lent. You know what I mean? Like, here's a mint. You know, it's like, just let something leave your hands, because it's the sense of this was mine and I'm letting it go. Okay, buy a meal for a homeless person and bring it to them in the city. You've got to feel something leave your hands. So what is that? It's the muscle of generosity starting to work in my life. But you will start to mature into consistent giving. And that's where the tithe comes in. I'm going to give something. Maybe start with 1%. Start with 2%. And just grow that year on year. But it's not just about our own heart. It's also about sustaining the work of the ministry. Let me just give you some math. Our team's been doing like some feasibility studies for our building project for the next year. And based on our adult attendance in Ramp Church every week and the average salary in Ramp Church, if every person in Ramp Church just gave the tithe over the next 12 months, we wouldn't even have to do a building campaign. We would have more than we need. So the life of the church in reaching the city is already built around a system that God ordained. And if you can see, wow, this is fueling mission in our city. It's providing places for people to encounter God. That if all of us just did the minimum principle in the word, we wouldn't even be doing a campaign. We would already have what we need to step into the next place that God has for us. When you're in tithe, I want to say that then you mature into what the Bible would call offerings, free will offerings. And this is, I think the ultimate vision, and this is where Stacy and I want to live, is irrational giving. It's where I so believe that God's got my back, I just give whatever, whenever. I've had friends before, and they so had a revelation of irrational generosity and giving that we were just standing around in a group of friends, and one person said, hey, I love that shirt. And the dude was like, you can have it. It was like, whoa. This like perspective on giving, this is some next level stuff. But this is Acts chapter 2. People started to find God, and they found each other, and they saw needs in a different way. And Acts chapter 2 says this, they had all things in common, and there were no needs among them. Isn't that a beautiful vision? That, yes, of course we have a giving fund in Ramp Church, that a portion of every single thing you give at Ramp Church goes to meet critical needs in our city. Every single thing you give, I want you to know that. But I want critical needs in our faith family, not just to be given from the church, but given between you. And someone came to me a couple of weeks ago and said, I had this bill in my life. Someone didn't even know about it, but they just walked up to me in the middle of the service. I didn't even know them. And they said, here, we want to meet this need for you. We just want to give you this gift financially. And she had to tell them, I have this need. I have this bill in my life, and you just covered it. It was the exact amount that they needed. That is radical generosity. Then we see what the Bible calls alms, which is gifts to the poor. All of these, this is the biblical vision for our life of resources. What would it look like for that not to be something that's in addition to your life, but it's built into the very way you do life? A few years ago, Stacy and I just heard a word over our lives personally where the Lord said, I want you to give all your extra. And so I quickly made sure there wasn't anything extra. No, we went through our budget and we just looked for every single, what's everything extra? And, then you start having a discussion like, what actually is extra? Like new clothes, that's not extra. It's like, so you start going through that and it ended up, and I just want to tell this story just because I want you to know that we're living it too. I'm on this faith journey as well. We eventually moved house because we felt like we needed more margin in our lives to be able to give. And I said, God, I don't want giving to be like, I don't just want it to be when I'm able. I want to build my life around generosity. And what Joshua chapter 1 tells us is when we sow in secret, we prepare ourselves for what's coming in a way that nothing else can prepare you. Because that life of generosity says, God, it's not mine anyway. You can take it. You can use it. It's all in your hands for your glory.